Have you ever wondered what the media and big tech is hiding from you? Like massive stories that actually affect you in your life that they don't want you to see because they make the left and the Biden administration look bad. Well, now there's a podcast dedicated to exposing all of that each and every day. So download the fastest growing podcast in the conservative movement, the Ben Ferguson Show podcast right now. That's right. You can listen to the Ben Ferguson Show podcast on iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Download it right now.
Welcome back in. Hour number 2, Clay Travis Buck Sexton Show. 2 days until Thanksgiving. If you find yourself traveling across the country or around the world, hope you're safe. And we appreciate you listening. We are thankful for all of you. We're joined now by former Vice President Mike Pence, who's got a new book out that is being well received. And as we start with you, Mr. Vice President, I appreciate you giving us the time. We've been talking. Fauci just
you bet, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no doubt. The book is So Help Me God, released earlier this month. Fauci just had his final press conference as he is in the process of retiring. I'm sure you knew that was going on. We were just talking about it. Everything in hindsight is often 2020. In retrospect, what could you and the Trump White House have done better to not allow Dr. Fauci to what I think is, quite frankly, drive us right off the cliff of insanity in terms of how we should respond to COVID? He said that people should still feel very proud if they're wearing masks. He said that as you get ready together with Thanksgiving family, that continuing to get COVID tests could make sense. Those are just some of the things he said not years ago, but just a few minutes ago at the White House. Do you have any regrets? Do you have anything that you would change about Dr. Fauci in particular and COVID?
Well, first, just let me say what a privilege it is to be on with both of you. Great fan of the show.
Thank you.
And was honored to have the opportunity to write my autobiography, So Help Me God, that came out about a week ago. It's a story of growing up here in Indiana. It's a story of being raised by a combat veteran and a first-generation Irish American, starting out as a Democrat, joining the Republican Revolution, and then through decisions that I made, beginning with the decision to put my faith in Jesus Christ, the decision to marry Karen Pence, we were able to serve and advance the conservative agenda in the Congress and in the governorship here in Indiana, and then as vice president. I'm incredibly proud of the record of our administration. And I'm proud of what the American people accomplished during COVID, guys. There's a couple chapters in my book, and one of which is entitled Only in America, where I really pay tribute to the extraordinary compassion of our healthcare workers, the extraordinary generosity and innovation of American businesses. I mean, from the time I was tapped to lead the White House Coronavirus Task Force, guys, I was really inspired by what the American people were doing. But in those early days, when I became the leader of the White House Coronavirus Task Force, it was a fairly small group. The president organized it a month earlier, and it included Dr. Tony Fauci and some other medical experts. That would grow. But one of the first decisions that I made was to add the Secretary of the Treasury, the Secretary of Agriculture, Larry Kudlow on our economic team, because I knew that the advice that we were going to give the president could not just be, the advice of the clinical doctors. It had to be balanced and take in the whole interest of the American people. And as I write in So Help Me God, in those early days, I know that Dr. Fauci, when we didn't know what was coming, when we didn't understand the disease and Americans were anxious, we were reinventing testing, we were manufacturing billions of supplies and over 100,000 ventilators in 100 days. I think in those early days, Dr. Fauci was a comfort to millions of Americans, and he always stayed in his lane. That's how I put it in my book. I mean, he was invariably the first person to say, "Look, I'll give you the scientist perspective, but I understand the president's got to consider a lot more." And that was one of the reasons why, 1 month into our efforts to essentially buy time and slow the spread, we worked to open up America again, and states like Georgia.
Mike, when did you realize, though, that Fauci was actually a partisan and the absolute worst and hoping to deep six the presidency that you were a part of?
Well, early on, I must tell you, I didn't perceive it that way. In fact, I thought President Trump and Fauci, as a couple of old New Yorkers, had a good working relationship. But things began to shift, toward the end. And I must tell you, it grieves my heart that the Biden administration lost more Americans in their first year with COVID, with all of the tools that we left behind, including vaccines. More Americans than we lost in our first year when we, for the most part, had none of those tools. But I do think it is part and parcel of the Biden administration essentially putting Dr. Fauci in charge of the national response. There's the old saying that, when you're holding a hammer, everything's a nail. And I wasn't surprised that the Biden administration abandoned our commitment to, therapeutics, abandoned our commitment to opening up states around the country and largely turned all of its focus on vaccines and ultimately and wrongly mandated vaccines for Americans that was partially turned aside by the conservative majority on the Supreme Court. So, as I said, I think, it saddens me that the Biden administration in so many ways squandered the progress that we made and putting Dr. Fauci in the lead of the Biden administration's response, I think explains their focus on concentrating everything in Washington, concentrating everything on vaccines, ultimately mandating vaccines instead of taking the whole of America federalist approach that we took in our administration.
We're speaking to former Vice President Mike Pence. He's got a new book out, So Help Me God. Vice President Pence, tell us this. The midterm election, there were some bright spots. There were the votes in the aggregate, but there wasn't the red wave that we needed. And it seemed that there were a number of points of failure might be too strong a word for some people, but I think for others it's not strong enough. Clearly there were some problems and some places we came up short. How do we fix that?
Well, guys, look, thanks for saying you're the first show, not surprisingly, that said that there was a red wave some places. I mean, you look at the governor's re-elections in places like Texas and Florida and in Georgia, where they had probably the most formidable Democrat candidate in the country. And Stacey Abrams raised $100 million, and Governor Brian Kemp, won decisively in the fall. And my friend Lee Zeldin came up short in New York, but he actually brought with him 4 new Republicans elected to Congress from the state of New York that could be our new margin of a Republican majority. So I really do believe there were pockets, there were places, and the common denominator to me, guys, is that, candidates that were focused on the future, that were focused on the challenges facing the American people today, which are, border security and crime and record inflation and high gasoline prices. Candidates that were focused on the future did quite well, but candidly, those campaigns that were focused on the past, including relitigating the past, did not fare as well.
We're talking to former Vice President Mike Pence. His book out last week, So Help Me God. Donald Trump announced on Tuesday of last week, same day your book came out, in the evening he announced that he was going to be running for president in 2024. I know that there were several people speaking out in Las Vegas who might be interested in potentially running in 2024 as well. You are among those. When would you think is the right time for you to officially decide if you are or are not going to run in 2024? What kind of timeline do you have in terms of making that decision?
Well, first, I'm always humbled to be asked. And early in my career, as I write in the book, So Help Me God, back in 2010, I had run for national office. I ultimately prayed through it with my wife, spoke to friends, and we felt called to come home here to Indiana and serve as governor of this great state. And that decision was, one of the great honors of my life and led to opportunities to serve as your vice president as well. So, what I can tell you is that, with 2 in active duty military in our immediate family, we actually haven't been together for the last 3 years, but this Christmas, everybody's going to be home in Indiana. And Karen and I are going to take time, as we always have, to sit down with our kids, their spouses, and talk to friends and continue to listen to the American people. And I always tell people there's two kinds of people in politics. There's people that are driven and people that are called. And if you read So Help Me God, you'll hear that I've been both. I've let my ambition get ahead of my values in the past, and the way that as a Christian I feel called to represent myself in the public square. But for the last 20 years, we've tried to follow a calling, guys, and so we're going to pray through it, give it careful consideration, and sometime after the first of the year, we'll just discern what our next calling might be. But I promise to keep Clay, Travis, and Buck Sexton posted.
Thank you.
I appreciate that. Do you, and as part of that, do you think Joe Biden will run? Do you think he should run for re-election? And does his choice in any way impact your own choice?
Well, the thing I'll tell you emphatically is Joe Biden and Kamala Harris should not be reelected as president and vice president.
No doubt.
Guys, I knew they'd be bad. I didn't know they'd be this bad, this fast. But then again, literally from day one, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have been dismantling the very policies that created the prosperity, the border security, the strength of our economy that we had in those first 3 years of the Trump-Pence administration. I mean, they literally a gusher of spending that launched the worst inflation in 40 years, a war on energy after we achieved energy independence that has now set in motion the gasoline prices through the roof going into a Thanksgiving weekend. And, of course, I've been down to the southern border in Arizona many times in the last 2 years. 5 million people have come into this country illegally in the last 2 years after we had reduced illegal immigration by 90%. So, whatever President Biden decides to do and whatever we decide to do, I'm going to be working my heart out to make sure that we do not get 4 more years of the disastrous record of the Biden-Harris administration. We've got a good start in the House of Representatives with a new Republican majority, but the next step is to win the Senate, win the White House, win state houses around the country, and I believe we will. I think we're at the beginning of a great American comeback.
The book is So Help Me God, Vice President Pence, the author. Sir, appreciate you being with us. We'll talk to you soon.
Guys, thanks for having me on. I so appreciate it. We'll talk again soon.
Yes, sir. Let's talk about Legacy Box, my friends. A simple and safe way to digitize your family's long-held videotapes and film reels. They also work with photos, old and new, not to mention slides, cassette tapes, and many other media forms. Their team of technicians digitally transfers it all, and they do it carefully and by hand. They've helped over 1 million families, even my own, the Sexton family, do just that. All this gets done in Tennessee in a few weeks' time. Get in touch with Legacy Box today and order your actual Legacy Box. You fill it full of your family's tapes, film, and photos. They use overnight shipping that's all trackable, and they're in touch with you every step of the way. This is a great week to get started since Legacy Box is giving you 65% off their normal prices during a Black Friday sales event. You can't afford not to do this for your family. The best part is seeing your old family movies again and sharing them with others. Visit legacybox.com/buck. That's legacybox.com/BUCK to save an unreal 65%. With limited quantities ready to ship, this deal is going to go fast. Legacybox.com/buck for 65% off. Legacybox.com/BUCK.
Inspiring you to seek out the truth. The Clay, Travis, and Buck Sexton Show.
Have you ever wondered what the media and big tech is hiding from you? Like massive stories that actually affect you in your life that they don't want you to see because they make the left and the Biden administration look bad. Well, now there's a podcast dedicated to exposing all of that each and every day. So download the fastest growing podcast in the conservative movement, the Ben Ferguson Show podcast right now. That's right. You can listen to Ben Ferguson Show podcast on iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Download it right now.
Newt Gingrich here, and I'd like to invite you to listen to my podcast, Newt's World. Most people know me as the former Speaker of the House, but I'm also a historian with a wide range of interests. I enjoy talking with fascinating people across a variety of topics. On Newt's World, we've had some extraordinary guests join us. like former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger.
Ending the war in Vietnam was a necessity in order to help heal the divisions in the country.
John Clifton, the CEO of Gallup.
The world has been winning the war against hunger for 4 decades. In 2014, it switched. We have a serious hunger crisis.
And House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy.
What I've really found the Republican Party to be, it's the party of the people, the working people of America.
I release 3 episodes of Newt's World podcast every week, and I hope you'll find my conversations engaging and informative, and hopefully we'll both learn something new. Listen to Newt's World on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcast, or wherever you get your podcast.
So, will he tweet or won't he tweet? Donald Trump could end up back on Twitter anytime he chooses. He's officially allowed back on. And, you know, one of the things we discussed yesterday, all the investigations, and I really mean this, it is hard, even as somebody who eats, sleeps, breathes, and is obsessed with the news and what is happening in a general, in a day-to-day sense. That's how I am. It's how Clay is. It's how our staff, our show team is. And with all that going on, it is difficult to keep track of all the different Trump investigations that they have going on at any point in time. And they're making the justice system in general seem farcical, whether it's at the state level in New York or the federal level with the DOJ. But, you know, Elon Musk realizes you can't have a free speech platform if you don't allow a former president and possible future president on your platform. The fact that we even got to that place is completely insane. I mean, it really is dystopian, Orwellian madness. And yet there are some who are out there telling us, you know what you really got to be worried about? Russian manipulation of Twitter. This guy, Dr. Galloway, he's a professor at NYU. I've heard him say some things about male-female relationships and dating in the modern era that are actually astute. So I will say, I go, oh yeah, that's actually true. But he's a lib, and so he has to say some crazy things. Here he is saying that the Twitter poll, Clay, to get that Elon put up, he put it up and it had, what was it, like 12 or 14 million votes or something like that. Poll that went up that got Trump reinstated was probably manipulated by, you guessed it, Russian intelligence. Play 4.
I think these polls are mostly a gimmick, and I would argue the people haven't spoken. The GRU has spoken. Twitter
Russian
has become,
intelligence, you mean?
100%. Twitter has become a playground for bad actors and fake bots. This poll is meaningless. This decision is meaningless.
I mean, I would just want to know why did he go GRU instead of FSB? I'm just curious. Or SVR, which would actually be the foreign intelligence arm. If he's going to start throwing around acronyms, maybe he should know what he's talking about.
Well, not only that, but the election is open to anybody, right? You can live anywhere in the world and decide that you want to vote in Elon Musk's poll. And I would just point out again, it was a 52-48 vote. And the 48 that don't believe Donald Trump should be reinstated are effectively saying they don't believe that a presidential candidate and former president should be able to speak on the platform. And again, Buck, you and I have talked about this. I'm not sure that being on Twitter benefits Trump at all, but as a point of democracy and being able to understand what our elected leaders or would-be elected leaders believe, shouldn't you want them to speak as much as possible so that you know as much as you can to help you make a decision about who the leader of the free world should be? That's whether you're a Democrat or Republican. I think Elon Musk is nailing this, and he's also showing how extreme an anti-First Amendment and anti-marketplace of ideas the Democrat perspective has become. And this all ties back to me, Buck, this idea that we have to fight with every fiber of our being that words are violence. That's something that is now deeply ingrained in our culture, in our country, that if you say something that offends or upsets someone, that is the equivalent of a violent act. And it's just not true.
Understand that also justifies violence in response in their minds.
Yes.
This is the part of it that's often left out. This is why when there are conservative speakers at colleges, the Antifa and, shrieking banshee lunatics that surround these speeches, they think that throwing things and threatening violence against those speakers is okay because they're stopping violence by using violence against the speech that they say is violence. It's crazy.
It is. It's absolute balderdash, and unfortunately, it's ingrained, and it's going to be really hard to beat back at this point in time. I want to tell you guys all about business owners out there as we get ready for the holidays. How many of you are trying to figure out exactly what your books are going to look like for the end of the year? If your business has 5 or more employees and you made it through COVID and the recession difficulties, you could be eligible to receive a payroll tax rebate of up to $26,000 per employee. Now, this is not a loan, no payback. It's just a refund of the taxes you've already paid. How do you get your business this refund money? Go to getrefunds.com. Their tax attorney specialists, this little-known payroll tax refund program, they do all the work, no charges up front. They just share a percentage of the cash they get with you. Businesses of all types can qualify, including those who took PPP, nonprofits, even those that had increases in sales. You can go to getrefunds.com, click on Qualify Me, answer a few questions. Payroll tax refund only available for a limited amount of time. Don't miss out. Getrefunds.com. No risk, high reward. Getrefunds.com.
And Buck Sexton on the front lines of truth.
Welcome back in, Clay Travis, Buck Sexton Show. So I want to open up phone lines here. Yesterday, and I would encourage you to go listen to this because I thought it was a really interesting conversation. We had Nancy Grace on to talk about a story that's leading the news everywhere right now. And both Buck and myself, and probably you and some of your family as you get close to Thanksgiving, it's a conversation that will likely be emerging. And it has to do with the quadruple murder that is, as of now, unsolved from near the University of Idaho, right off the campus there in Moscow, Idaho. And we got a ton of feedback after that conversation that we had with Nancy Grace yesterday. So I want to open up phone lines, just these specific callers. If you are listening to us in Spokane, Washington, the area, KQNT AM, huge audience that we have there. We believe it extends down into the University of Idaho area, right there on the border between Idaho and Washington. I'd like to hear, and Buck would like to hear, from people in Moscow, Idaho, about how all of this is going down, what the community is responding. There hadn't been a murder there in 7 years, Buck. And there were 6 people in this house. 4 of them were stabbed to death on the 2nd and the 3rd floor. They still have been unable to find a alleged perpetrator, at least publicly. Not a lot of evidence in this case. There were 2 people on the 1st floor. I don't know if they were in locked bedrooms. I haven't seen the specifics about why they were not attacked. But on the 2nd and the 3rd floor, 4 people stabbed to death while they were sleeping. They were not found, I don't believe, Buck, until the next day around noon. These are college kids. They believe the stabbing happened in the 3 to 4 a.m. times area. These kids have been out until around 2 in the morning. It's a Saturday on a college campus, not uncommon at all. And I can't stop reading about this case and or consuming stories about this case. And I know many of you are the same as us. So 800-282-2882. We didn't give people an opportunity yesterday to react, but we would like people in the Moscow, Idaho region, in that area, to let us know what's going on and what it feels like to be in this community where there hadn't been a murder in 7 years, and suddenly there's an unsolved quadruple murder of college kids.
And, you know, yesterday when we had Nancy Grace on to talk about this, she said that she would not connect the data point, if you will, the report about a dog that had been skinned and gutted that was found a few weeks before this, but in the same neighborhood. This is not a big place. Moscow, Idaho, as we said yesterday, 25,000 people. This is a small town. It's pushed right up against the border of Washington State. So it's western Idaho. And today the police are saying that they're unrelated. But when I read the explanation for why it's unrelated, they just said it's wildlife activity or something. It seemed bizarre to me. And you have to remember, and this is just the way it is, unfortunately, in instances like this, where there's a very, very serious, heinous crime that happens in a community that just has limited law enforcement resources. The cops that are dealing with this, especially the first ones on the scene, to say they're not used to this is a dramatic understatement. I mean, very few cops have seen these kinds of crime scenes before, but there's already a lot of reporting. Is it fair or not? I don't know, right? We're not there. We're not able to cover this on the ground. People are saying that, tire tracks were not preserved immediately. I mean, some rudimentary investigative mistakes seem to have been made here, which may slow the whole process down of even getting some sense. I mean, they have no idea of motive. They have no suspects that we've even gotten an inclination about yet. And I think people are realizing that this could be a long haul to try to get some measure of justice for these families by finding whoever did this. I mean, this is among the more heinous crimes anybody can think of in recent memory. So I don't understand why the dog, based on the reporting, why that would be unrelated. But apparently, police are saying it is unrelated. There's just some things that don't add up, Clay. There were other people in the house. How is it this person was able to, the killer was able to do this without waking anybody? There was a dog in the house that didn't, maybe they're used to, maybe the dog barked a little bit. It didn't wake anybody up because they're used to it, but the dog has been taken away from the house. This is reporting from today. How could somebody manage to get in? Think of the risk of discovery that this murderer would be taking by going into this house with a knife and one by one killing these individuals in their sleep. It would be so easy for someone, including people in the house who weren't even attacked, to cry out, to scream, to say what's going on. It just doesn't. Look, I don't know if anyone's ever seen anything like this before. I've never seen anything like this.
And I asked Nancy yesterday during that interview, I don't think you can underrate the aspect of the murders occurring with a knife. It's so violent. It's so visceral. You are right up on top of the person, and it feels quite a lot different than, say, shooting someone with a gun from a distance.
Yeah, I remember I listened to a very popular iHeartMedia podcast on the Piketon Massacre in Ohio, which I think was the second biggest mass murder in the country in that year after the Pulse nightclub shooting. So it was a major, and it was a dispute between two families that escalated to where I think it was 5 of the family members were killed in their sleep. They were killed with a firearm, though.
Yeah.
So somebody went in and killed, and clearly there was a baby at one of the crime scenes that was spared. They didn't go after the baby. They were going after the adults in the family. It was a mass murder, 5 people killed, but they used a gun. And in this instance, this individual was using a knife, and it cannot feel right now. To that community, for example, they have no idea. It's not like they have a sense of who this might be and the person's on the run. They seem to know nothing.
At all.
Given the national level attack, meaning the police seem to know nothing about who did this. Now, they could be I know law enforcement officers listening to this are saying, look, they could be holding back key details. That is possible, clearly. And like I said, we're not doing the investigation, but it doesn't, how they pull all this together. They're going to have a lot of DNA. We discussed this yesterday, a lot of evidence at the scene, but you need the other piece of that, meaning you need to have a match with somebody. So if they're not in any databases, really tough to know who you're looking for.
And also, again, if you're living in that community, 800-282-2882, it's unlikely that someone just suddenly snaps and stabs 4 people to death. So is this a vagrant? Was this a crime where someone is moving through? Are there any other crimes that are somewhat similar that could be connected to this one in the region, in the area? To me, this is one of those stories. I'm not surprised at all that it is receiving the amount of attention it does, and that it's opening many different newscasts right now, because this is a mystery the likes of which we frankly just do not see very often in this country. So again, we'll take some of your calls in the next segment. I'd like for people in that region to give us a sense for the community and the community's response so far. 800-282-2882. Maybe also, if you're an investigator, a criminal profiler, based on
I'd be curious to hear from. We got a huge law enforcement community that listens. If you have any insight you can offer to us, the only investigations I ever did were counterterrorism, which is obviously very different from this.
We'd love to hear from you guys as well in the event that you could help to analyze this based on what you do for your profession. 1-800-282-2882. We will take your calls. We're also going to be speaking with Dr. Latipo from Florida, the Surgeon General, who has helped to drive what is the best response, I think, on a state basis in the state of Florida to COVID. What does he think of the comments made by Dr. Fauci and Dr. Jha today in the White House press briefing? We will talk with him in the third hour of the program as we continue to move towards Thanksgiving. We're grateful for all of you hanging out with us.
Our nation was founded on the principle that all men are created equal, but there are far too many colleges and universities, including those in the Ivy League, continuing to use race as a factor for admissions. The Supreme Court is deciding a case on this subject right now. But there's a unique American college that doesn't discriminate based on race. It never has, and it never will. It's Hillsdale College. This college in Michigan was founded in 1844 to educate all persons, irrespective of nationality, color, or sex. It continues that policy today, admitting students on the strength of their character, ability, and intentions, not their heritage or background. Dr. Larry Arnn, the president of Hillsdale, recently published an article explaining Hillsdale's colorblind policies and its related refusal of government funding, even indirectly in the form of federal student aid. Read it for yourself at clayandbuck4hillsdale.com. That's clayandbuck4hillsdale.com. And after you read it, you may even want to support Hillsdale with a year-end gift. It's a great institution that supports so many of your values and ideas. Read Dr. Arnn's article today at clayandbuck4hillsdale.com.
Two of the hardest voices to tell apart, but one unified voice when it comes to the truth. The Clay, Travis, and Buck Sexton Show.
Have you ever wondered what the media and big tech is hiding from you? Like massive stories that actually affect you in your life that they don't want you to see because they make the left and the Biden administration look bad. Well, now there's a podcast dedicated to exposing all of that each and every day. So download the fastest growing podcast in the conservative movement, the Ben Ferguson Show podcast, right now. That's right. You can listen to Ben Ferguson Show podcast on iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Download it right now.
Newt Gingrich here, and I'd like to invite you to listen to my podcast, Newt's World. Most people know me as the former Speaker of the House, but I'm also a historian with a wide range of interests. I enjoy talking with fascinating people across a variety of topics. On Newt's World, we've had some extraordinary guests join us, like former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger.
Ending the war in Vietnam was a necessity in order to help heal the divisions in the country.
John Clifton, the CEO of Gallup.
The world has been winning the war against hunger for 4 decades. In 2014, it switched. We have a serious hunger crisis.
And House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy.
What I've really found the Republican Party to be, it's the party of the people, the working people of America.
I release 3 episodes of Newt's World podcast every week, and I hope you'll find my conversations engaging and informative, and hopefully we'll both learn something new. Listen to Newt's World on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcast, or wherever you get your podcast.
Welcome back to Clay and Buck. We said we'd take some calls. We're looking into this grisly quadruple murder in Idaho. We've also been told by people from the region that we're supposed to pronounce this Moscow. So we have learned, not like the way Americans pronounce Moscow, the city in Russia. So Moscow, Idaho. And we have calls from the region. This is one of the advantages we have of having an audience in all 50 states and so many different stations in those states, is that we can say pretty much any corner of the country, hey, tell us what's going on the ground there. We have Marie in Moscow, Idaho, who is a retired law enforcement officer. Marie, thanks for calling in.
Hi, guys.
So what do you make of what we've learned so far and how this investigation's going?
Well, some things surprised me, and, I'm not privy to any information that you guys don't have. So, the Moscow Police Department is really good about keeping a hold of information that they shouldn't be disseminating. So I want to make that clear. But in my experience, and I worked for 25 years for the Moscow Police Department, they have never done what they've done with this investigation, which is pull all the patrol officers in to work this case. And ISP is taking over patrol functions. So every police officer in this jurisdiction is working on this case. And
so this is truly like this is all hands on deck for Moscow PD.
Yep. Yep.
And if you've lived there, you said 25 years. We said there hadn't been a murder in 7 years. When you heard this happen, how stunned were you that it had happened here based on your experience as a police officer?
I wasn't stunned. I mean, Moscow's a small town, but it's a town like any other, and we've had our fair share of homicides in this area. I was a little surprised that they didn't catch the perpetrator right away, so I don't think that's something where, one of their friends went berserk, because those kind of things are a lot easier to solve.
Yeah, I mean, that was the next thing I was going to ask you, Marie, is your sense here, I mean, again, just going on, I know you don't have access, you were in the PD there, you were in the police department there, you're not anymore, and that's fine, because that means that you can actually talk to us without, divulging anything you're not supposed to, and I get that as a former CIA officer, but just your sense, right, the tingling on the back of your neck, do you think that this killer knew these individuals, or is this just random serial killer stuff?
No, I think he knew him, and the reason for that is because the residence is in a place that's not very accessible. You have to go there specifically. So it's not on a through street, it's in a little cul-de-sac, not a place where some random guy is just going to walk into. So that's probably why, the information has come out that they believe it's targeted. And that feels right to me, that it was somebody who knew them or was acquainted with them, knew the area, and knew how to get out of the area.
Is there a lot of fear in the community, by the way, right now, just because obviously there's a tremendous amount of sadness and grieving for the loved ones and for these people who were lost, and for their families. But just is the community very tense right now?
I think there's a little of that. I think there's quite a bit of people just taking stock of their own safety precautions. I have a friend who's a locksmith in town, and he's been getting calls off the hook. His phone's been ringing off the hook for people who want to update their locks and whatnot, which is, in Moscow, people tend to pride themselves on the fact that they never lock their doors. And that is changing this week after this homicide.
Marie,
so it is affecting the people, I think.
In your experience, the stabbing, the fact that this was not a gun murder, the fact that it was a knife, is that one of the reasons why you think it's more likely to not be a random act of violence? And also, as a part of this, would it surprise you if the person who did this didn't have some form of violent behavior in their background? Is that normal to have someone kind of, for lack of a better term, snap? Or is there usually a lot of warning signs of some sort of violent behavior like this before it happens? Maybe it's even happened before somewhere else.
One thing that I learned in 25 years of law enforcement is not to make assumptions. Because we've seen both here in this town. People snapping and shooting people snapping and attacking in different ways. So I know that the police are looking at everything. And I understand what you're saying and why you're saying it, but I don't think you can draw that conclusion.
Marie, we appreciate you calling in and sharing, decades of experience, not just in law enforcement, but in this town where this happened. We're praying for you and the whole community there. Thank you for calling in. Doug in Idaho, in Post Falls, Idaho. Doug, our team tells us, oh my gosh, you actually knew one of the students who was slain.
Yes, sir, I did. A close personal family friend.
Oh gosh. What
can you tell us about this person? How did you have a relationship with them, and what is the response in the community to obviously this horrible tragedy?
I'll speak to the response first is sorrow and sadness, but happy to see a response go national wide and everybody getting involved. Of course, Maddie's mom, Karen, is my wife's best friend. Very close. Every year they go on the local Christmas cruise on Lake Coeur d'Alene for the Santa Claus cruise. Maddie and my daughters and my wife and Maddie's mother, Karen, of course.
So this is awful to happen anywhere, but in Idaho, in a small community like this, it really does, I would imagine, touch almost every family because it is a small town and it is a small state, and the connections, I would imagine, as you're just referencing, are very, very substantial. And so many people are struck by this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you get into these smaller communities, everybody knows everybody pretty much in one way, shape, or form. And yeah, just, Maddie herself had touched a lot of lives. She was very active in the community, very active online, and just a sweetheart.
Well, we're praying for her family and for the whole community there. Doug, thank you for calling in. Clay, we'll continue to follow this investigation. I mean, let's just all hope that there's a break in this case and that they can find this mass murderer that is on the loose in Idaho right now. We're going to be joined here in a few minutes. We're going to be switching gears to talk more about policy and COVID, and Dr. Ladapo, the Surgeon General, the brilliant Surgeon General, and one with a backbone, by the way, because he stood up against the madness of Fauciism. He'll be joining us to talk about, what we're going into this winter time, and also Fauci's retirement and much more, so stick around.
Clay Travis and Buck Sexton on the front lines of truth.
Have you ever wondered what the media and big tech is hiding from you? Like massive stories that actually affect you in your life that they don't want you to see because they make the left and the Biden administration look bad. Well, now there's a podcast dedicated to exposing all of that each and every day. So download the fastest growing podcast in the conservative movement, the Ben Ferguson Show podcast, right now. That's right. You can listen to Ben Ferguson Show podcast on iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Download it right now.